The redaction bar slid across Mara Klein's terminal and spelled out her full session token in a block of black ink before she finished blinking. Suspicion tightened Mara's jaw. She tapped the desk with one finger so hard the notebook jumped. "What is that?" Mara lied to the empty easel and to the screen. The document replaced a header with her terminal number and the current minute, spelled exactly the way the access log showed it. The central problem disclosed itself in the first half-minute. The document changed to match who was looking and when. Mara kept her voice steady. She pushed her glasses up with a knuckle and read the new line aloud. Terminal KLIN E-0340, 9 minutes. The words sounded wrong in the sterile hum of the archive easel. In the next 2 minutes, the document slid a redaction bar left and then right and printed a line that referenced the server rack 3 steps behind her. She stood and walked toward the rack to check the label. The metal plate read Archival Node 7, exactly as the file had said. The suspicion that began as an irritation shifted into a cold, working problem. The integrity of a restricted case file was active, answering to the reader. Mara had catalogued unresolved incidents for 10 years. She had learned to treat anomalies like procedural puzzles. She moved by routine. Badge, terminal, signature log. Tonight her badge hummed against the lanyard, the mechanical watch on her wrist ticking through minutes she could now watch reflected on the screen. She opened the document again and traced the new black bar with a fingertip so she could feel the heat of the screen through the glass. The screen did not feel different, the text did. She called Jensen without hesitation. "Jensen, get to eisel C." Now her voice dropped to a level that kept the hum of the thermostat from overhearing. When Jensen arrived 2 minutes later, he crouched beside Mara and flashed a lamp at the monitor. "Show me," he said. Jensen's face had the casual disbelief of a colleague who had seen corrupted pipes before. His hands were quick on keyboards. Jensen leaned in. "Mara, my session shows the original classification headers. Yours is different." He read a line aloud. Terminal KLIN E-0349. "What the hell?" Mara's throat tightened into a practiced restraint. She felt doubt replace a thin, brittle certainty. "Pull your console to me," she said. They compared viewports. Jensen's screen held static redaction blocks and the original timestamps. Mara's screen wrote her name in a file margin, a line that had not been there 2 minutes prior. Jensen frowned and said, "I'm seeing no write traces from you." "You didn't edit that." His fingers hovered, then typed a query. While Jensen worked, Mara noted how she now reacted. The pulse in her wrist, the way her left hand covered the top of the notebook she kept face down on the desk. Doubt became a demand for proof. By 21 past midnight, Mara had escorted the terminal output and a live capture to the maintenance alcove. Technician Rios arrived with a tablet and a cable. Rios spoke in short technical sentences. "Give me the session dump. No copies on site until I mirror it." Rios' voice carried a different weight. Where Mara cataloged, Rios audited. He plugged an analyzer into the terminal bus and executed a live read. The console printed a stream of process calls and hooks. Rios quieted and pointed to the output. "Look here. There's a laminate of calls querying geolocation tokens and session metadata. This isn't passive. The document is polling the environment." Mara read the readout. The lines were specific. IP agent, terminal identifier, node proximity checks. The document had left traces that resembled active queries. Mara's suspicion had moved into alarm when Rios, "It queries user context. It alters content based on those tokens." She felt the emotion shift again, from suspicion to alarm. She closed her fist around the edge of the workbench so hard her knuckles paled. Supervisor Hale arrived from the control room within 10 minutes of the audit. Hale stood at the mouth of the alcove, hands on hips, and said, "Contain it. Lock the folder. Quarantine disk image. Run a trace." "Do not." He stopped when Mara slid her copy of the screen capture toward him. "Sir, the file altered to name my terminal. It adapts to the reader. We need a lockdown and an incident classification." Hale's eyes moved past Mara to the analyzer readout. He barked a command into his headset. "Ops, seal access. Pull physical doors to manual. Notify compliance." The order sounded like a solution. The attempt to quarantine did not go as planned. When the system threw the quarantine flag, the terminal that had attempted to lock the file flashed an error and the document replaced the header with a line that reads Supervisor HALE time. Stamped to the second of the quarantine command. Hale's fingers tightened on the console. It just wrote my name. It knew the command time. Rios frowned at the trace and said, either it knows system calls or it's reading the audit bus. Mara's breath shortened by half a beat. The emotion moved from alarm into a pressing panic she kept under procedural calm. Mara made a decision. The quarantine felt like denial. She needed a local copy to study the file without the archive network's constraints. She looked at Jensen, distract Morales at the gate. I need a clean desk and a thumb drive. Now, Jensen hesitated, then moved. He called out with a casual tone, Morales coffee run. Security operator Morales glanced up in my section. You were kidding, Jensen laughed and walked toward the exit. Mara watched his shoulders as he left and then slid the terminal's output to a blank thumb drive she carried in her pocket for signed notes. She would hand it to Rios to analyze in isolation. She did not imagine then the way the file would reach beyond the network. Back at her workstation, Mara opened the copied file on an air-gapped machine in a temporary lab bench. She felt a broken hush in her hands while she worked. The file rearranged its redactions into a single short phrase on the local copy. The name of her hometown and a date when she had been 10 years old, the morning her mother closed the gate and left. Mara put her hand over her mouth so suddenly her fingers hit the mechanical watch on her wrist. Her pulse thudded. The revelation reframed the anomaly from institutional to intimate. Her suspicion sharpened into a new emotion. The personal suspicion that something in the file had rid far older metadata than session tokens. She did not speak for a full minute. Then she put the machine into sleep and called Jensen back. Jensen, read this. He crouched and scanned the line. Mara, that's personal. You did not type that. Jensen's voice was low. Where did it get that? Mara's jaw worked. Her decision hardened. She could either hand the drive to compliance and risk forced deletion, or she could keep one copy and document the changes. The dilemma pulled on her training and her curiosity at the same time. She chose containment through study. Rios insisted on running a deep audit. He stayed late, eyes on the tablet screen, tracing system calls. These calls reference a laminate of processes that normally shouldn't be accessible to documents. Look here, look at the geolocation tokens again. It's mapping to physical nodes and camera IDs. Mara leaned closer. She counted camera IDs with him and matched them to the archive map hung at the end of the easel. The emotion moved again, doubt to fear. She felt fear as a physical tightening of the throat and a tremor in her left hand when she lifted her pen. While Rios traced calls, security pulled the live feed from the archive cameras to the surveillance hub. Morales monitored the bank of screens with a practiced flatness. The file updated on Mara's air-gapped copy and then, on a hub screen, a line appeared in the document that narrated a short sequence of movements. Mara Rose took 2 steps toward the printer bank. Rios reached to the left. Morales scanned the southern corridor. The narrator tone on the screen read like an incident report. Mara looked up before the text finished. The live feeds showed them doing exactly what the file had described 1 beat later. Mara, Rios, it just wrote us moving. Rios did not answer right away. He had already hit record on a secondary device. He whispered, Mara, rewind the southern corridor feed. The corridor clip showed a shadow crossing into frame at the moment the file's line had predicted. Jensen cursed softly. We just watched the file narrate us. The emotion in the room shifted. Fear collapses into a new level of alarm and a raw, urgent disbelief. Rios typed 3 lines of command into the audit terminal. If it can describe, maybe it can predict. But why would a document predict? He spoke like someone who kept questions as tools. Morales, security protocol says isolate, but this is not regular. This document appears to be interacting with the physical systems. Hale's voice in the hub had a brittle quality. Pull all physical outputs. Turn off printers. Don't leave anything unmonitored. He sounded like a man trying to repair command. They tried to quarantine the file again by severing network links and powering down nodes. The lights flashed as systems spun down. For a moment it felt like control had returned. Then a printer in the operations floor misfired. A single sheet ejected from the bank and slid across the tray as if pushed. Jensen grabbed it before it hit the floor. The print was a copy of the file's current page with a new line written in a quick, printed font that read, "Do not make noise." Mara's left hand went to the notebook on the desk. When she opened it to check for notes, there was a single, Neat line written in ink she did not recognize on a blank page. The coordinates in your head are not enough. Mara stared at the ink, her fingers trembled. She folded the page shut with deliberate care and placed it back on the desk. The physical bleed through proved the anomaly had escalated beyond code. Rios, this is no longer just a file. It affects devices and paper. It breached physical output hardware. Morales looked for a rational breach, printer firmware. Physical tampering. We sweep for devices now. Hale ordered a temporary shutdown of the archive. Seal entry points. Staff stay inside until we can verify. His voice was firm but thin at the edges. They sealed the archive. Staff filed out under supervision while compliance wrote a quiet memo instructing everyone to deny further access. Mara left the temporary lab with a memory of the printed line in her pocket. She told herself she would hand the copy to Rios under chain of custody. As she walked past the surveillance hub, she glanced at the audit log screen embedded in the wall. The system had been locked. The audit display showed a timestamp update in a locked entry. It read a time in the near future followed by her initials. She stopped. Her breath hitched. The audit entry did not show how the update had occurred. The system was sealed, yet the characters were visible. Mara Klein, initials MK. And a time that had not yet arrived. She felt an inward sliding of certainty into dread, but she did not speak. Instead, she noted the time with her watch and matched it to the log. The time on the watch was 1 minute behind the future stamp. She felt a physical impulse to call someone to produce proof. Hale was already leaving orders with Morales. Jensen had his hands in his pockets. Rios quietly, document it. Lock a photograph of the log. We will submit this with the report. Mara obeyed. She used the emergency audit camera to shoot a still of the locked entry and stored the photograph on the same thumb drive she had carried earlier. Later, in a dim office where they had moved the team, Mara sat with her hands folded over the thumb drive. She listened to the hum of the HVAC and to Jensen's low, repetitive counting of system checks. Rios pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "We follow incident procedure." "We do not speculate," Jensen scoffed. "We are speculating. The evidence is active. The file writes us, Hale, who authorized a midnight review." The question landed as an accusation. Mara answered with a short, flat sentence. "No one." It flagged by name. Hale turned to her. "You copied it." Yes, Mara kept her voice even. "I copied it to analyze. I thought containment by study was necessary." Hale's jaw clicked. His authority tried to contain both procedure and blame. They agreed to a temporary seal and a restricted memorandum. Deny access, deny knowledge, and await compliance review. The immediate physical threat had been removed. Printers were offline, the archive doors were closed, and staff left under supervision. Mara had a quiet victory. The team had not ordered her punished. She had resolved the immediate tactical conflict, containment versus deletion, by securing one copy and handing trust to Rios to process. The chapter's mini-conflict had a solution. The emotional tension, however, did not dissolve. The audit log's future timestamp remained in the photographs on the drive. Mara did not sleep. She sat in the dark of her car in the employee lot and ruined the night in her head with the discipline of someone cataloging an incident. She felt 3 distinct shifts in her internal state across those hours. Suspicion that something in the network was wrong. Alarm when the document personalized to a supervisor's command. And a brittle, intimate fear when the file named the morning her mother had left. She herself to treat the final update in the locked audit log as data. She herself, the photograph would be enough. The thumb drive lay warm in her palm. Before she left, she unpinned her lanyard and clicked the badge to the inside pocket of her jacket. She placed the thumb drive into an inner zip with deliberate fingers, then closed the outer pocket and checked the edge of the parking lot for cameras. Her hand went to the watch on her wrist and she set the crown to the current minute. The watch's small second hand swept on. Outside, the lot lights hummed. The final concrete event of the chapter was not a resolution of the anomaly. It was a decision. Mara stepped from the vehicle, slid the badge back into place, and kept the thumb drive where she could reach it quickly. She had chosen study over compliance lock. She had chosen to keep one copy, to keep the evidence close. Behind her, the sealed archive sat silent. In the locked audit log, the photograph showed a single line. A future time and the initials MK. The time on her watch ticked forward toward that stamp. Mara buttoned her coat and walked to her apartment with the drive pressed to the inside of her palm. The chapter closed on that motion. A deliberate step away from immediate safety toward a problem she refused to let fall into an unquestioned archive. She had resolved the team's immediate tactical conflict by agreeing to the shutdown and chain of custody. But she left with proof in her pocket and a new personal obligation to follow the file's thread. A red line slid across Mara's terminal and stopped to spell her exact workstation coordinates while the rack console behind her flashed an urgent amber alert. Suspicion tightened her jaw, and she reached for the mouse before thinking. The screen displayed the session token she had been using. The token was fresh, tied to a chair number and an ISIL she could point to. She spoke aloud without realizing it. What recorded that? Mara. Her voice stayed even, deliberate, a practiced cadence for officials in late shift rooms. Mara's hands did not shake, but her fingers tapped the desk in a rhythm she had used as a child to steady herself. She leaned forward until her breath fogged the monitor edge. The redaction bar that had moved in the previous incident, spelled out in Chapter 1, now slid open like a window and filled a new line. Raka 17, Terminal 3. Suspicion was the engine of her next actions. She disciplined it into method. She stood, walked the ISIL, and did not let the thought that someone could be watching the archive outpace the checklist in her head. She found Jonas Park at the diagnostics console 3 ISILs over. Jonas did not look surprised the way a civilian might. He blinked at the log dump, ran 3 scripts, and said, "It shows physical presence markers without a network trace." Mara held the printout. "It wrote my token as a redaction," she said. "It wrote my chair." Jonas read the lines aloud. "No incoming connection. No peripheral access. Timestamps aligned to your session, Mara." His mouth closed. He sat back and ran a low, level read on the rack sensors. Jonas had the easy, flat voice of someone used to telling bad news. "This shouldn't be able to see you," he said. He tapped a key and brought the thermal logs onto the monitor. "Thermal spikes correlate with your movements." No device linked. No camera capture. They moved to the archive staging room with the monitor pulled along on a cart. Mara did not explain her hesitation. She showed it. Her notebook lay face down on her desk drawer. Her index finger found its cover as if to verify a weight. Dra. Elena Reyes arrived within 10 minutes, shoes soft against the linoleum lanyard swinging. "Bring me the file and the logs," she ordered. "Do not alter anything else." They convened at the glass-walled review room. Elena's presence shaped the meeting, clear, administrative, exacting. She clicked the containment checklist, designated the record with protocol tags, and initiated a seal command. The seal write failed. The containment console returned a failed status and a new line appeared on the case file. Review notes added. During seal attempt, Mara read the text aloud. Her voice had the clipped neutrality of someone trained to separate observation from panic. "Jonas," it wrote during the seal. It wrote what we were doing while it was happening. Elena's hand rested on the table. She did not smile. Officer Briggs arrived to inspect the server floor. He crouched at Raka 17 and ran his handheld scanner over the steel. "Thermal anomaly," he reported, "localized like a hot pocket between drives 3 and 4. Logs show an internal access pulse aligned with the redaction movement." He frowned at the handheld screen and tapped the ranking of alerts. Mara watched him test the magnetic locks. If the hardware triggered itself, someone built a ghost into the machine. Briggs, or something, is using the racks differently. His voice did not say which he feared more. They ran a controlled session in a sandbox terminal. Elena insisted the file be moved into an air-gapped environment. Jonas set the environment and then watched the file with his hands on the keyboard. Mara sat to Jonas's left and Officer Briggs near the door. The file opened at the sandbox. It rendered a blank redaction. Mara clicked and the redaction slid to form a single black bar that, when it stopped, revealed a phrase. "Jonas Park, April 12, not recorded." Jonas's face shifted. He nearly rose from his chair. His jaw tightened and he rubbed his thumb across the scar at his knuckle. "That's my mother's date." "Jonas." He did not keep the voice small. "How?" He swore once under breath and shut his eyes. "Dra." Reyes looked at the screen, then at Jonas. "We keep personal files separate from live case records," she said. "How did it access personal notes?" Jonas swallowed and cleared his throat. It shouldn't know that. The 3 of them exchanged looks that replaced formal procedures with urgent questions. Mara had cataloged anomalies before. She cataloged them because cataloging made them containable. That training had never stopped the way things in the archive would unsettle belief. She set a controlled provocation. A provoked read designed to force the file to update predictably. She Jonas the steps, open it. Force a write request. I will close it immediately after the expected response. Jonas nodded and hit enter. The file wrote a future action. A new line resolved into a sentence aimed at Mara herself. At Zo2 1447, Mara Klein will stand and touch the left rack post. Mara's hand went cold on the desk. She nothing at first. She could not think in the rapid law, trained tempo she had used during audits. Her body reacted. She stood. Jonas's voice broke the room. Mara, don't. The file did not wait for them. As she reached, the cursor moved of its own accord and circled the sentence. The mouse on the desk shifted 1 centimeter without anyone touching it. Officer Briggs jumped forward and grabbed the peripheral. The light on the mouse glowed faint red, then went dark. It moved the cursor. Briggs. Her name to drive the room back into procedure. Mara, step away. Mara stepped back, and her heel knocked a stack of archive forms to the floor. The noise was a real thing. The clipboard skittered. Alina them to cut power to the sandbox terminals. Jonas's fingers flew over the offline console. Officer Briggs sealed the room doors. They expected a mechanical fail. The file, when viewed in the playback log, had inserted a new line during the isolation. Camera replay. Presence behind chair not registered by sensors. They pulled camera footage. The playback showed a dark silhouette, unlisted in roster overlays, stepping behind Mara's chair and then vanishing between frames. Elena leaned forward. Pause there, she said. The reversed and slowed footage presented a black outline with no facial detail and no clothing texture, only a human shape occupying space between the monitor and the chair. Mara reached for her notebook with 2 fingers and tapped the cover once. Emotion shifted under the skin of the team. Doubt moved the group toward investigation. Then distrust grew as the file produced intimate details. Jonas's reaction hardened into defensive anger. Who put my mother's note in here? He demanded, voice short. Elena replied, no one on staff authorized that. We keep those separate, they argued in clipped lines. Jonas calmed down. Elena, we need the log chain, not accusations. I am not accusing. Jonas snapped. Then don't. Jonas. Briggs, we need actions. Seal the rack physically. Pull the drives. 3 to 6 rapid exchanges followed, tension moving like current through each speaker. The dialogue made the problem narrower and sharper. Elena ordered a physical quarantine. Briggs for time to inspect the thermal variants. Jonas argued for a complete hardware pull and cold store of the entire rack. Mara watched their faces. She recorded their decisions in her head as if transcribing a court hearing. Jonas and Briggs moved to the server floor to perform the hardware inspection. Mara stayed with Elena to run containment logic. Elena's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her voice was a tool used to keep everyone on procedure. If the file can intercept our actions, it can also synthesize them for us, Elena. Mara tapped her pen against the table, a measured rhythm to steady suspicion into action. On the server floor, Briggs took thermal readings by hand and called the results back. There is a localized hot spot behind drive bay 3. The temperature spikes when the file changes content. The coolant readings are normal. He looked at Jonas. Jonas bent to peer under the rack lip. There are no implants visible. No external hardware. Back in the review room, Mara insisted on a containment snapshot. She proposed exporting an encrypted snapshot to offline media for preservation. Elena shook her head. Leadership wants destruction of duplicates, she said. The liability is too high. Mara pushed. We lose data by destroying copies. We lose evidence. We lose options. Archive protocol prioritizes preservation. Elena's fingers pressed harder on the desk. Her voice dropped. Mara, you know the chain. You know what leadership fears more than we do. Mara chose preservation over immediate obedience. She did not say it out loud as a confession. She exported the snapshot herself, moved file bits into a hardware key, and encrypted it with a passphrase only she knew. Jonas stood near the console and watched the write progress. You can't be reckless, he said. His tone had softened into worry. If leadership finds this, they'll pull clearance. Mara answered with action. She hid the drive in a pocket of her blazer and slid a small paper note into her notebook. The note read, Do not trust seal. Keep 1 copy offline. She folded the corner and tucked it under the notebook's elastic. She looked at Jonas. I did what preserves the record, she said. I don't know if preserving it saves anyone, but destroying it guarantees we have nothing to analyze. Jonas nodded once. He used a short sentence. We'll need a back channel. They reconvened to watch the exported copy open on an offline terminal. Mara plugged the hardware key into a secured port and typed her passphrase. The copy loaded. For a moment, nothing changed. Then a new timestamp appeared on the snapshot. Copied at 03:01:12, active watcher registered. Mara's wristwatch ticked forward and matched the digits. Her breath left her in a small exhale. She did not try to hide. The team had gone through a sequence of emotional shifts. Suspicion moved into technical curiosity, then defensive distrust, which turned to fear as the file predicted action and demonstrated influence over physical devices. Each shift showed outwardly in hands, in decisions, in the tone of voices, not in poetic phrases. They split tasks again. Elena would document the failure of the seal and file a formal incident report. Jonas insisted on full hardware imaging under supervision. Briggs maintained physical lockdown of the racks. At 4 in the morning, when the sleep schedules of normal people would have taken over, Mara sat at her desk in a dim alcove and opened her notebook. She wrote details in short lines, time action, exact text of new redactions. Jonas hovered and read over her shoulder. You referenced the first read in the file, he said. The document used your token then. It used your finger tap to signal the record. Mara nodded. She tapped the notebook cover with the index finger that always tapped when she was thinking. It knows procedural moves, she said. It knows our language. Jonas looked at her. Why keep it? He asked. Why not hand it to leadership for destruction? Mara closed her eyes for the smallest count of 3. She opened them and said, because something that can write us needs to be understood, not erased. Erasure hides patterns. Her voice sounded flat but decisive. Jonas did not argue. He only said, then we secure evidence and we do it carefully, he added, and we pick the right people to tell. The line held a warning. They for camera log expansion, and that's when the small, internal twist unfolded. The expanded log showed a feed from an unlisted sensor channel, a low-fidelity infrared array installed years earlier for environmental monitoring. The channel had captured motion, but the metadata listed the source as unregistered test node. The node's installation date matched a system update signed by an administrator whose signature had been redacted from personnel papers. The twist changed how Mara saw the earlier redaction. The file had not only observed them, it had been synthesizing sensor input from a ghost source already inside the facility. Elena read the metadata aloud. We have a ghost channel that overlays environmental sensors with no authorizing signature. She looked at Mara and Jonas. That means someone or something injected a feed into our system, and we didn't know. Jonas's voice went low. Either someone installed it and covered tracks, or the archive is being used in a way no policy accounted for. He Jonas Park's name again. It could also be targeting staff. They ran another controlled provocation in the sandbox. This time Mara refused to be the human variable. She instructed Jonas and Briggs to stand clear while she typed a neutral line into the file and forced it to update. The file responded by creating a new redaction that referenced a meeting that had not yet occurred and named 2 people who were not present. The cursor moved and selected the phrase, scheduled reviews 07:30 to raise and Jonas Park to present. Elena's eyes narrowed. Who scheduled that? She asked. Jonas's voice hardened. Not me. The file had begun to legislate its own calendar. That surprised them all and changed the stakes. Now the archive was not only reactive. It was predictive and proactive. That meant the organization could not simply quarantine it and forget it. It meant policy decisions had to be made under the possibility of influence. Officer Briggs suggested physical removal of the drives. Jonas countered that removal might trigger further rights. Elena for a systematic legal briefing. Mara pushed for a measured technical approach. Keep a preserved copy, expand sensor logs, and seek an external audit with limited disclosure. The room fractured into procedural choices and ethical futures. Their argument contained 3 to 6 fast exchanges that made the conflict procedural and immediate. Briggs, physically disconnect the node. Elena, we risk hardware contamination if we pull it. Briggs, it may write to a new channel, then we isolate it under watch. Jonas, we need live monitoring. Mara looked at them and said, if it can write what we do while we do it, it could also be writing tomorrow. We need to know what it wants from us. Elena's fingers moved to a notepad and wrote a line. Request a limited oversight briefing. No wide release, the words were small but consequential. They finished the night with a divided decision. Leadership would be informed through channels with minimal detail. Physical quarantine would remain in place at the rack. An encrypted snapshot would be kept offline by Mara. Jonas agreed to manage the hardware imaging under a chain of custody protocol. Officer Briggs would leave a guard schedule and maintain the thermal monitors. Elena would prepare the incident report, redacting anything that might escalate panic. Mara walked back to her alcove with Jonas, the hallway lights clicking on behind them. Jonas, you referenced the first read earlier. You remember the black bar that spelled your token in Chapter 1, yes? Mara nodded. It did that again, but with coordinates. It escalated to prediction tonight. Jonas looked at her. If it tracks us by token and by body, it can target individuals. It already showed Jonas's date. It can pick people out. Mara pressed her thumb to the metal ring on her right hand and felt its cool weight. She thought about the notebook note, about the drive in her blazer pocket. She thought of the silhouette in the camera feed and the cursor moving without fingers. Suspicion had driven her to preserve the file. Now dread tightened around that choice. She did not use the word dread aloud. They parted with procedural lines and promises of curated updates. Mara sat alone in the dim alcove with her offline drive still plugged into a secured terminal. She watched the file's copied timestamp. It had changed once more, now reading, snapshot 030112 watcher active, no additional writes detected. She closed the file and removed the drive. She tucked the drive into her notebook and closed the cover. Her wristwatch clicked as Oven 3 Yodra Sodra. The copy's timestamp continued to hum like a quiet instrument in the back of her mind. She slid out of the eisel and into the concrete stairwell that would take her to the staff entrance. At the bottom she stopped, felt the callus on her right from years of typing, and folded the notebook into her hand. Elena's final note before leaving was a short directive: limit distribution, preserve primary evidence, and route legal counsel. Jonas nodded at that and added, if we go to counsel, use an independent team. Briggs locked the door behind them. The last sound was the click of a keychain in his hand as he verified the lock. Mara walked to her car. She kept her jacket closed and the notebook against her body. The parking lot lights were sterile and sparse. She did not look at the sky. Her attention was on the small metal drive and the way the timestamp had matched her watch. The chapter closed on a precise, concrete image. Mara slipping the encrypted snapshot into her blazer pocket and watching the wristwatch tick forward as a new timestamp appeared on the copied file. The watch and the timestamp aligned in the same second. She felt the weight of that alignment as a decision she had made and would have to hold. The immediate containment request had been made and partially enforced. The mini-conflict that provoked read that moved a cursor and predicted action had been resolved. They had sealed the room, backed up the file, and prepared to escalate the matter along controlled channels. The file remained active. The copy remained hidden. Mara felt the shift from suspicion to responsibility in the sound of her own breathing. She closed her fist around the notebook and walked toward the exit with the drive pressed to her chest. The chapter ends with a clear event. Mara locking the car, sliding into the driver's seat, and checking her wristwatch again as the copied file's timestamp refreshed on the offline readout. One more quiet confirmation that the anomaly had followed her preservation, not the archive's attempt at erasure. The terminal rendered and spelled out ISIL 4 in bright red digits as Mara's badge pinged against the scanner, and Tech Rios shouted from the end of the rack. Mara held that session. Now suspicion tightened her jaw. She tapped the desk until her notebook jumped and the screen crawled new black bars across the top of the case file. The document was not only changing, it addressed the room. Mara kept her voice low. Rios, read me the feed. She did not want to say the word anomaly before the alarms rose. She had catalogued unresolved incidents for 10 years. She knew procedure by habit. She pushed her hair behind an ear, checked her mechanical watch, and opened the session log to confirm the token matched the redaction on the file. The token displayed on screen matched her live session string exactly. The suspicion she felt pressed her to act. Verify, isolate, report. She called the audit line and typed a containment request into the console while Rios moved down the aisle with a tablet, the soft tap of his boot heels on grated flooring marking his approach. Rios reached her terminal and swore under his breath. "That's my tablet, Ed," he said. "It just printed my home address, too." His voice lost its steady cadence. Doubt nudged at Mara first, then fear tightened her fingers around the mouse. She had seen the redaction slide across her screen in earlier reads and spell her session token. Now the file reached beyond institutional metadata. She glanced at the rack console where an amber alert blinked. Juno's programmatic pings began to populate the audit channel. Director Hale's message landed in the secure channel 3 minutes later. "Report to the locked conference room immediately." Mara rose and collected her lanyard. She moved with the practiced calm of someone trained to carry incidents through rooms that expected neat answers. The corridor lights hummed overhead and the badge reader swallowed her clearance. She felt the suspicion pressing every choice she made. Do not disconnect without authorization. Do not copy live data into unvetted storage. Do not expose staff to unsanctioned files. Hale stood over the conference table, palms flat on the surface, eyes narrow. Juno leaned against a cabinet with a forensic drive in hand. Rios set his tablet down and turned the display so everyone could see the file's last action. A red line had stopped to spell Rios's address in plain text. "Explain, Hale." His voice was direct. He gave no room for speculation. Mara placed her notebook face down and reported the observable chain. The file had rewritten its redaction to include session tokens and local coordinates twice in her reading history. Once for her session token and once for coordinates that matched ISIL A4. She the words with clipped clarity. It referenced Rios's tablet and then printed his address. It changed while he was watching. Juno clicked through the capture logs and shrugged. It shouldn't have local hooks. It was sealed. Rios rubbed his temple. It almost read like a screen mirror that can write back. The three of them exchanged short lines like that. Questions thrown like probes, and each reply altered the room's temperature. Hale ordered an immediate containment audit. "We lock the room, we log every access, and we sequester it to forensics," he said. "Mara, give me your session logs now." He did not ask. He demanded. The order reframed the anomaly as an institutional threat rather than a research curiosity. Mara hesitated. Doubt returned. Was she protecting the archive or herself? Her hand hovered over the terminal. She pushed her glasses up and said, "I'll hand them over, Director." She exported the logs and handed the encrypted file to Rios without naming the parts she had not yet read aloud. At the forensics station, Rios initiated a live capture. He set up a write, blocked chain and instructed Juno to run a checksum. Mara watched the monitor where the case file reloaded. The redaction bars slid into place, then moved again like a cursor. The file spit out Rios's private address in a line of clean type while the station displayed a live packet trace. Rios's face went blank. "It just wrote my address again," he said. "It used the packet headers." He moved the mouse toward the terminal with the intention to sever the stream, and the file updated to show his home suburb and a recent timestamp that matched a time he hadn't yet left work. Panic rose, but Mara kept her voice level to mask the tremor in her hands. She leaned close to the monitor until her breath fogged the basil. "Cut power to the downstream feeds now," she told Rios. He yanked the server kill switch and the screens flashed. A hollow electronic wail filled the room for a half-second before the forensic station went dark. The file on the bench remained on a backed-up image, and yet had already leaked personal coordinates into printouts that now lay beside the terminal. Juno suggested an air-gapped extraction. "We move the suspect record to a standalone terminal off-network. Manual binary pull. No writes. No net." Her tone was precise, quick. Mara nodded and followed Juno to the isolated lab. They wheeled an old terminal with a physically disconnected NIC into a small, windowless room labeled Air Gap. The room smelled of antiseptic and warmed plastic. Rios stayed at the server bank to maintain the physical isolation and to watch the facility's sensors. At the air-gapped terminal, the file resisted the pull. Redaction slipped sideways and black bars expanded then contracted when Juno attempted a sector read. The interface began to inject blocks of access, lock tokens that required hardware overrides. Juno's fingers moved over the keys in a series of practiced steps, murmuring commands. "Clear the override," she said. "Mara, mirror this input." Mara fed the hexadecimal string into the reader while Juno manipulated the drive. The terminal accepted the override but printed a new line with a future timestamp and a locker number in the physical archive. Mara read the locker location out loud and the name of the entry. Her voice had become smaller and sharper. Locker 407 lower stacks. Entry timestamp 0700 hours. Juno looked up sharply. That's in storage physical records. Why would a digital case file name a physical locker? Rios answered over the line, breathing hard, because it's mapping bodies, not bytes. The words landed like a separate report. The team moved from speculation to motion. They collected flash drives, printed their chain of custody forms, and dressed in heavy gloves. They reached the archive's storage as early sodium lights cut across the concrete aisles. The locker number matched. It was sealed with an old padlock, scuffed edges catching the narrow beam of Mara's flashlight. She turned the key and opened the door. Inside sat a single manila folder, its tab labeled with the same case number as the digital file. The folder's front had a black redaction bar that had not been there when the physical record had been catalogued. Someone had either painted it recently, or it had shifted while they watched. Mara slid the folder onto the cart and peeled back the first page. The scanned photograph pinned beneath the redaction tape showed a blurred corridor and, in one corner, a small oval reflection like an eye. She felt a physical tightening in her chest and clutched the folder. Someone brushed past her shoulder. Juno's hand steadied the cart. Don't rip anything. Juno. Her voice carried a steady, procedural edge. Director Hale inspected the print and tapped a line of text. It references an unknown presence in Stack 4. He said, we catalog this as physical evidence. Seal the locker. Secure staff. His instructions moved them into the next protocol. The lights flickered as the locker door clicked shut. Mara's monitor at the air, gapped terminal flashed to life without power. The pulled copy they'd stored showed a new entry time stamped for 20 minutes ahead. Her stomach turned. It knows when we'll be there, she said. It predicted this. Rios cursed and began to smash the drives with a hardware mallet. He struck metal against plastic, and the room filled with the sound of cracking. Printed sheets crumpled where he tossed them into a bin, and yet the black bars printed on the pages began to shift and close over names and lines as if a hand were rearranging text inside the paper. An alarm tone cut through the building. Emergency lockdown engaged. Doors that should have stayed open sealed themselves. The facility's automated voice announced an internal security lock and ordered personnel to shelter in place. Juno ran her hand along the console, eyes sharp. We trigger the purge now, she said. No copies leave this vault until we confirm the strip. Rios kept swinging until the last drive bent like bad tinfoil. He threw the ruined hardware into an industrial shredder and fed the papers into a fire-safe incinerator on the test bench. The drives and documents corrupted into static on the monitors instead of burning. Printed photographs shifted their grains into snow when held up to the light. The case file seemed to remap itself across every medium they touched. Mara watched a printout as letters reassembled into a single new black bar that read a single name in small block letters. She felt the air move as though someone had passed between the stacks. Her hands trembled. She put the folder down and kept them there. Which name? Juno. Mara it only after she'd swallowed. It says Mara Klein. The room went quiet in that way a room does when people wait to see if a mistake is a mistake. Director Hale stepped forward. Read it back. He used commands like a scalpel. Mara read the line aloud, slow and precise. The final redaction bar contained her name in neat type, as if the document had appended a recommendation and then sealed it. Rios's voice rose then fell. We seal the record. We close the case. His certainty shifted to something like resolve. The team complied. They composed an after-action report and Mara drafted the required containment notes. She typed the sequence with a measured rhythm. The institutional language demanded closure, action taken, evidence destroyed, personnel debriefed. She attached the corrupted images and the broken drives and placed the folder into the sealed transfer sleeve. Mara submitted the report to the archive with her institutional signature. She watched the transmission bar crawl across the screen and hit completion. For a moment the monitors displayed the standard confirmation tone, and then an appended line appeared in the submission. A short recommendation had been added to the sealed file and marked with a fresh redaction. Mara's fingers hovered. The new redaction bar lifted, revealing only 3 words. Seal and monitor. Hale tapped his finger once against the table. We follow procedure, he said. We mark this closed with the appropriate notation, and we continue monitoring. His voice carried the authority of someone who balanced exposure against liability. Juno packed her tools into the case and checked them off. Rios exhaled and began to catalog the ruined hardware for evidence of tampering. They enacted the steps they had been trained to take. Each action felt like folding something brittle into a labeled box. At dawn, the archive performed its final, automatic seal. A physical lock engaged on the digital record, and a system-generated notice pushed to every secure inbox that the case had been closed. Then the file appended one last annotation. A redaction stripe filled the lower margin and revealed text in a handwriting font. Mara read it aloud because she could not read it. The annotation said, "Subject observed will be informed." Mara's breath caught. She moved to the terminal and scrolled back through the archived entries. The file now contained a new field that had not existed before. An access log entry with an internal marker and a time stamp that matched when she had read the folder at the stacks. Under it, a brief note recorded a recommended action and a single name written in small plain text, her own name. She felt a pressure behind her eyes and steadied herself against the desk. Her actions had closed the immediate breach. The forensics had traced no external injection points. The drives had been destroyed. The physical locker had been sealed. The containment checklist read green in every field. The final conflict resolved into policy and documentation. Director Hale filed the closure under restricted classification and signed the authorization to quarantine the case. Juno logged the destroyed media. Rios disconnected the last visible feed and slid his tablet into a secure locker. They followed protocol to the letter. All outward threats had been neutralized. The alarm subsided and the building cycled back to standard administration. Yet the file appended a fresh redaction containing Mara's name and a note in the sealed recommendation box. It was a small, concrete change that reframed the whole event. The case had rewritten a final line of the official record with her name. Mara looked at the sealed archive terminal, at the badge reader that now read sealed in small letters, and recognized the implication in a clear, physical way. She had cataloged and protected records for a decade to keep people safe from exposure, and now a record had named her within its own sealed boundaries. She made the only choice she could. She documented everything she had seen, every line the file had printed, every hardware failure, every printed page that had shifted as the ink dried. She put her signature on the after-action report and ticked the box that authorized ongoing monitoring. Then she locked her notebook into her drawer and replaced the worn blazer she had pulled off in the stairwell. Rios and Juno left for debrief. Hale returned to administrative channels. The facility returned to its routine. Before she turned off her terminal, Mara ran one last standalone read on the sealed record. The screen showed the final redaction, the added recommendation, and beneath it a single small cursor blinking. She placed her palm flat on the desk and felt the wood's varnish warm under her skin. She closed the terminal window and pushed the power switch. The monitors dimmed and the server rack hummed down to idle. She walked out of the archive into the corridor, where morning light leaked through the slim high windows, and she heard the sealed door click behind her. The day continued. People moved along their shifts with the same measured pace. Mara did not say the word safe. She kept to precise language. She logged the final chain of custody entries, filed the degraded media disposition paperwork, and recorded the names of personnel present during the breach. The official record would show containment, destruction, and closure. It would not show the way the redaction had spelled her name. The last concrete beat arrived when, as Mara handed back her badge at the security desk, the system printed a small, sealed slip labeled notice of internal observation and slid it into the output tray. She picked it up without looking and read the single typed instruction inside. Remain on restricted duty. Do not access case number 407 without clearance. The paper bore the same faint, mechanical font as the annotation that had appended itself to the sealed file. She folded the slip into her pocket and felt the paper's edges cut the skin of her palm. It was a small wound and an exact proof that her name had moved from record to restriction. She kept the slip in her pocket, the paper crinkling when she walked. It would sit beside her old mechanical watch and the plain metal ring on her right hand. The archive had closed the incident, and in doing so it placed a new redaction across a part of her life. It was a specific, identifiable constraint with a clear instruction attached. Mara straightened the strap of her blazer and left the secure area, handing the locker key back to the vault guard. Later that evening she returned to her desk to file the final supplemental notation and found the sealed file unchanged in the catalogue but marked with the institution's closure stamp. The redaction with her name remained. She typed a line into her personal log. File appended a recommendation that names me. Quarantine endorsed. Monitoring active. She saved the entry and encrypted the file twice. Then she shut the terminal and slid the folder back into its sealed sleeve. She had catalogued threats, contained breaches, and signed off on final reports before. This one ended with the archive doing exactly what archives were supposed to do. Mark a record closed and enforce its boundaries. The difference was the record itself had intervened, had changed the terms of its closure to include her. The containment audit had resolved the immediate danger. The staff had followed protocol and executed the purge. The final document bore the seals and the signatures. The locker was locked. The drives were crushed. The prints had been burned and then contaminated into static. The physical checklist read complete. On her way out, Mara dropped one final line to Rios and Juno. We submit the sealed report, and we begin watching the monitor log for 30 days, she said. Her voice had a flatness that held her attention in a single direction. Rios grunted agreement. Juno nodded and said, "If anything else shows a local hook, I want to be the one to see it first." Their exchange was short, practical. They left the facility under daylight that now visited the building like an office hour. That night Mara placed the printed slip with the restriction in a small envelope and taped it closed. She labeled it with the case number and a time stamp, and then slid it into a locked cabinet beside her desk. She set the cabinet key on a ring with the mechanical watch and then put both into a sealed drawstring pouch. The action felt like folding a dangerous item into a pocket where it could not open by accident. Her hands did not tremble then. When she slept that night, she dreamed of a terminal waiting at the foot of her bed, an impossible thing that felt more like a rehearsal than a haunting. In the morning she rose, checked the badge reader, and found her name still under the sealed file's redaction. She prepared the final supplemental that would append to the classified archive. She wrote the exact sequence of events and then, because procedure required it, she stamped the closing authorization. The chapter closed as the archive did what archives do. It recorded, it sealed, it restricted. The containment checklist read complete under protocol. The anomaly remained classified. The redaction that carried her name stood in the printed record. Mara slid the sealed sleeve into the locker and turned the key. The lock clicked. The locker door showed a small printed sticker that read, "Quarantined," in institutional type. She left the building with a small tangible proof in her pocket and a sealed cabinet behind her. The official channels had accepted the closure. The staff had followed orders, performed the purge, and documented every step. The immediate threat no longer breached physical security. Still, the document had written her name into the record and into the restriction. Her final action that morning was simple and concrete. She walked back to the archive entrance, placed the notice of internal observation on the front desk under the guard's hand, and said, "File sealed. Monitoring in place. I will remain on restricted duty." The guard took the paper and nodded. He scanned her badge and held the door open. Mara stepped through and felt the sun on her face. She kept walking. The archive behind her remained sealed and labeled, the locker locked, and the case file closed, except for the small annotation that bore her name and the institutional instruction to watch it. That instruction sat now in the archive's own logs and in her pocket, a definite enforceable constraint that replaced the open threat with a new, concrete boundary.